The daughter-in-law, with a glacial smile that didn't reach her eyes, tied a vibrant red scarf over the already sightless eyes of her blind mother-in-law. It wasn't a gesture of affection, but a mark, a disguise for the horror to come. With cold, calculating force, she pushed the fragile old woman into the corral, right there, at the edge of the abyss, where the furious bull, a mass of muscle and rage, awaited. The daughter-in-law's mind whispered, "Nature will take care of it." But fate, at times, has its own guardians. The bull, intended to be the final sentence, approached. Instead of horns and charges, it lowered its head, sniffing the old woman's wrinkled hand with unexpected tenderness, an instinctive recognition of fragility. And then, like a bolt of savage justice, the animal turned. Its eyes, previously focused on the unseen threat, now burned with a fury directed at the daughter-in-law, who, in a panic, screamed and flailed her arms, running desperately away from the unexpected guardian nature had sent. The daughter-in-law's shrill scream tore through the thin air of the plateau, a raw, desperate sound echoing absolute surprise and terror. Her arms, once flailing in a frenzy of malice, now thrashed in the air like dry branches in the wind as she ran. It wasn't a planned run, but a chaotic flight, driven by the most primitive instinct for survival. The bull, a mountain of flesh and fury, gave no quarter. Its heavy hooves kicked up clouds of reddish dust, each thud on the ground a drumbeat of pursuit that resonated directly in the woman's chest. Her eyes, once filled with a gleam of wicked triumph, were now wide with terror, reflecting the dread of being the prey, not the predator. The daughter-in-law, whose name was Elara, stumbled over a loose stone, almost falling. Adrenaline pulsed through her veins, a poison that both propelled and exhausted her. She could feel the animal's hot breath on her back, the scent of earth and sweat, a palpable threat that made her run faster than she ever thought possible. The corral, once the stage of her crime, now transformed into an arena of judgment. The edge of the abyss, which was meant to be her mother-in-law's tomb, became a perilous boundary, a precipice that awaited her with every clumsy step. As Elara ran, the world around her seemed distorted. The sun, once a silent accomplice to her cruelty, now mercilessly burned her skin, a searing reminder that there was no easy escape. The jagged rocks, the dry, creeping vegetation, everything seemed to conspire against her. She could hear the bull's deep bellow, no longer a grazing sound, but a hunting roar, laden with an intent that chilled her soul. Elara's mind, once so sharp and calculating, was now in tatters, unable to formulate a plan, merely reacting to the imminent terror. Back in the center of the corral, the blind old woman remained motionless. The red scarf, which Elara had tied with such malicious intent, now seemed an ironic prop, a symbol of a blindness that wasn't merely physical. She couldn't see the pursuit, but she could feel the vibration of the ground, the echo of hooves, and above all, her daughter-in-law's desperate screams. At first, there was confusion, a wave of disorientation amidst the bull's sudden silence and Elara's burst of panic. But then, a strange calm enveloped her. The animal's scent, once a threat, was now a comforting presence. She could feel the warmth of its breath nearby, a silent promise of protection. Elara, for her part, had no such solace. She tried to hide behind a small mound of old hay, but the bull was too large, too fast. It circled the obstacle with surprising agility for its size, blocking any escape route to the corral fence. Elara was cornered, with the abyss to her right, the bull in front of her, and the wooden fence, which seemed so fragile now, to her left. Her eyes scanned the perimeter for an exit, but there was none. The air felt thin, and she tasted the metallic tang of fear in her mouth. The bull stopped a few feet from her, snorting loudly. Its eyes, once so calm when sniffing the old woman's hand, now gleamed with cold intelligence and relentless fury. It didn't charge immediately, but circled her, like a predator toying with its prey before the final strike. Ilara stepped back, then another, feeling the edge of the precipice dangerously close to her heels. She could hear the wind howling in the gorge below, a sound that seemed to call to her. "No! Stay away from me!" Ilara screamed, her voice choked with panic. She tried to gesture at the bull, perhaps hoping to ward it off, but her movements were uncoordinated, only serving to further irritate the animal. The bull lowered its head, scraping its hoof on the ground, a clear warning. The earth trembled beneath her feet. Ilara knew there was nowhere to go. The fence was too high to climb quickly, and the abyss was certain death. She was trapped, and nature, which she thought to use as her weapon, had turned against her with a savage and unexpected vengeance. Her earlier glacial smile had transformed into a mask of pure terror. Fate, indeed, had its own guardians, and justice, at times, was delivered by the most unlikely of messengers. The bull took a step forward, and Ilara felt the ground give way slightly beneath her feet on the brink of nothingness. The patch of earth beneath Ilara's feet crumbled with a dry, terrifying sound, carrying with it a tuft of grass and a few loose stones into the unfathomable void of the abyss. A sharp cry escaped her throat, more a guttural reflex of terror than a word. She lost her balance, her arms flailing in the air like broken windmills, and for an instant, gravity pulled her with an irresistible force. Her wide eyes saw only the deep blue of the sky merging with the grey of the plummeting rocks, a cruel invitation to the final fall. But Ilara didn't fall. In a desperate reflex, her hands found the rough edge of solid ground, her fingers clinging with the tenacity of a creature on the brink of annihilation. Her nails scraped the rock, tearing her skin, but she felt no pain. Adrenaline was a potent anesthetic, and fear a relentless engine. She hung there, precariously suspended, her legs dangling over the precipice, her heart beating like a war drum against her ribs. The wind from the abyss, once a distant howl, now blew cold on her face, bringing with it the scent of damp earth and the void. The bull, however, seemed unimpressed by the drama, its dark eyes fixed on her with an intensity that seemed to pierce her soul. It snorted again, a deep, menacing sound that made the ground vibrate. Ilara felt the imminent danger, not just from the abyss, but from the animal watching her, patient and relentless. It was as if the bull knew she was trapped, that there was nowhere to go. It didn't need to charge. Gravity and panic were doing the work for it. With superhuman effort, Ilara tried to pull herself up, inch by agonizing inch. The earth was friable, and every movement threatened to crumble even more of the edge. Her muscles screamed in protest, and sweat streamed down her forehead. Mixing with dust and unshed tears, she could feel the weight of her own body, an anchor pulling her down. Every breath was an effort, every heartbeat a reminder of finitude. Back there, the blind old woman remained in her strange bubble of serenity. The red scarf, once a symbol of her humiliation, now seemed a crown of dignity amidst the chaos. She couldn't see Ilara hanging, but the vibration of the ground, the sharp cry, the tense silence followed by the sound of crumbling earth, all painted a vivid picture in her mind. She felt the bull move slightly, a protective presence still nearby. There was a strange justice in the air, a scale tipping, not towards malice, but towards redemption. Ilara finally managed to pull her upper body over the precipice, but her legs still dangled. She twisted, trying to find purchase, and in that moment of vulnerability, the bull took a step forward. It wasn't a furious charge, but a deliberate, calculated movement. It lowered its head, not to gore her, but to nudge her with its snout. A gentle yet firm push, right in the middle of her back, where she was most exposed. Ilara's world spun. The nudge wasn't strong enough to send her flying, but it was enough to completely destabilize her. She slipped again, and this time her hands lost their grip. For one terrifying second, she felt the absolute void beneath her feet. The cold air of the abyss enveloped her, and the scream that escaped her lips was abruptly cut short by the sound of the wind. But again, fate intervened, in an even crueler way. Her feet found something, not solid ground but a small rocky ledge, a precarious step projecting from the abyss wall a few feet below the edge. She fell onto it, the impact making her gasp, her body aching. She was trapped, not falling but not safe either. The ledge was narrow, barely giving her feet space, and the rocky wall was smooth and steep, impossible to climb without support. Ilara looked up. The bull was there at the edge, looking down at her with its dark, deep eyes. There was no triumph in them, only a cold, almost bored observation. It seemed to be waiting, as if it knew she couldn't escape. Above her, the blue sky seemed to mock her predicament. Below, the abyss called. She was in a rocky purgatory, suspended between life and death, between the animal's fury and the void's veracity. The mother-in-law's red scarf, up above, seemed to pulse with an energy of its own, a beacon of silent justice. Ilara extended a trembling hand to the wall, seeking any support, but there was nothing. The rock was cold and unforgiving. She tried to scream again, but her voice was hoarse, and the wind swallowed her words, turning them into inaudible whispers. The bull took another step, this time closer to the edge, and Ilara smelled the animal's strong scent, a mix of earth, sweat, and a primal threat. It lowered its head again, and Ilara thought it would gore her, pushing her to the final fall, but it merely snorted, and a small piece of earth and some loose stones fell from the edge, hitting her shoulder and head. It wasn't an attack, but a reminder, a provocation. It was toying with her, prolonging her torment. Ilara's panic transformed into pure despair. She was trapped, with no way out, at the mercy of an animal that seemed to possess an intelligence and intent that defied comprehension. Nature, which she had tried to manipulate, now held her in its grip, and there was no escape. She looked at the bull, then at the abyss, and finally at the corral fence, which seemed so distant, so unattainable. Up above, the blind old woman, enveloped in her own peace, was the sole witness to her private hell. Time seemed to have stopped, stretched into an eternal moment of terror and regret. Ilara was on the brink, not just of the physical abyss, but of the abyss of her own soul, confronted with the consequences of her cruelty. The bull, her unlikely executioner, merely watched. The cold of the rock permeated Ilara's bones, a biting chill that seemed to drain life from her extremities. The ledge was a torment, too narrow for any comfort, just wide enough to postpone the inevitable. Her fingers, once clinging with the ferocity of survival, now trembled uncontrollably, her nails broken and bleeding against the unforgiving surface. Every muscle in her body screamed in protest, a symphony of pain that echoed the wind's howl in the gorge. She couldn't move, couldn't push herself up, and with each attempt, small grains of earth and loose stones slipped beneath her feet, falling into the void with a sound that seemed to mock her helplessness. Up above, at the edge of the abyss, the bull remained, a dark, imposing silhouette against the sky that was beginning to tint with the orange hues of late afternoon. Its eyes, once calm, were now pools of darkness, watching her with a patience that was more terrifying than any furious charge. It seemed in no hurry. It was as if time had bent to its will, transforming Ilara's torment into a private spectacle, a final act of a cruel play. From time to time, it snorted, and the deep sound made the air vibrate, carrying with it the strong scent of earth and animal, a constant reminder of the threat that hung over her. Ilara raised her eyes, searching for a sign, a hope, anything that could pull her from that rocky purgatory, but there was nothing. The wall above was smooth, without cracks or handholds. Below, the darkness of the abyss was already beginning to swallow the last lights of day, promising an endless plunge. Despair settled in, heavy and suffocating, stealing her breath. She tried to scream again, but her voice was just a hoarse whisper, swallowed by the wind. Tears, which had refused to come before, now streamed freely down her dusty face, mixing with sweat and blood. She thought of the old woman up above. The old woman's blindness, which Ilara had so despised, now seemed a blessing. The old woman couldn't see the horror of her situation, couldn't feel the biting cold nor the paralyzing terror. She was in her bubble of peace, perhaps even gratitude, protected by the same animal that was now Ilara's executioner. The red scarf, the damned red scarf which Ilara had tied with such malice, was now a symbol of her own ruin, a cruel irony. The bull took another step forward, and this time it wasn't just a snort. It lowered its head, not to gore her, but to scrape its hoof on the edge of the precipice. A dry, dragging sound that made Ilara's heart leap into her throat. More stones and loose earth fell, some hitting her hard, scratching her already bruised skin. It wasn't a direct attack, but a constant reminder of her fragility, of how close she was to annihilation. It was toying with her, prolonging the agony, savoring every moment of her terror. Ilara's mind began to wander, thoughts mingling in a chaotic whirlwind. Images of her life flashed before her eyes: envy, greed, cruelty towards the old woman, harsh words, petty acts. She had built her life on the misery of others, and now nature itself was collecting its price. There was no escape, no forgiveness. Justice, which she thought she could manipulate, had manifested in a way she could never have foreseen. The abyss wasn't just physical, it was the abyss of her own soul, a reflection of her inner darkness. Her muscles were failing. Her legs, dangling in the void, began to tremble uncontrollably, threatening to give way at any moment. She tried to cling tighter, but there was no strength left in her fingers. The cold intensified, and a dangerous numbness began to spread through her body. She knew she wouldn't last much longer. The fear of falling was almost outweighed by the desire for it all to end quickly, for the pain and terror to cease. The bull, as if sensing her weakness, took another step, this time closer to the edge. Its dark eyes seemed to penetrate Ilara's soul, reading every one of her thoughts, every one of her fears. It was the personification of vengeance, a silent guardian of justice, and Ilara, suspended between life and death, between rock and void, knew her time was running out. The wind howled, and the sound seemed to carry her name, calling her to the inevitable end. The ledge, her last precarious refuge, began to tremble slightly, a final warning that not even the most solid rock could bear the weight of her cruelty for much longer. Suddenly, a dry, loud crack echoed through the gorge, momentarily muffling the wind's howl. Ilara felt the rock beneath her feet give way. It wasn't a total collapse, but a deep, alarming crack that stretched from the edge of the ledge to the abyss wall. A larger piece of rock broke loose, falling into the void with a distant, hollow sound, like a drum beating at the bottom of hell. Ilara's heart leapt, and she clung to the wall with what remained of her strength, her nails scraping desperately on the cold stone. The ledge was now even more precarious, narrower, and the remaining part seemed to tilt slightly towards the abyss. The panic, which had been a wave, was now a tsunami, completely engulfing her. She looked at the bull, her eyes wide with terror, silently pleading for an end, for mercy. But there was no mercy in the animal's eyes, only the same cold, almost satisfied observation. It snorted again, and this time the sound was longer, deeper, like a final warning. The air around Ilara seemed to vibrate with the threat. Night was almost complete, and shadows danced on the abyss wall, transforming the rocks into grotesque figures, into demons that seemed to reach out to pull her down. The cold became unbearable, and Ilara felt her limbs grow numb, the pain transforming into a dangerous dullness. She knew it was the end. There was nowhere left to go, nothing left to do. She was trapped, suspended, waiting for the inevitable moment when the final rock would give way, or her strength would abandon her. The mother-in-law's red scarf, up above, was now just a dark blur against the last remnant of light in the sky, a spot of color that seemed to mock her misfortune. Ilara closed her eyes, tears freezing on her eyelids, and waited for the sound of the final crack, for the void to swallow her, for the end of her torment. The bull up above took another step, and the ground trembled again. It wasn't an earthquake, but enough for the crack in the ledge to open a little wider. A moan escaped Ilara's lips, a sound of pure agony and resignation. She felt the rock move beneath her feet, a slow, inexorable movement that pulled her towards the abyss. The rock groaned, a guttural, dragging sound that seemed to come from the depths of the earth, echoing Ilara's own agony. It was no longer a subtle tremor, but a violent and gradual separation. The ledge, once a precarious refuge, now transformed into an execution platform, tilting ever more towards the void. Ilara felt the rough friction of the stone beneath her feet, a grinding that tore at her already frayed nerves. She tried to push herself up, but her muscles, exhausted and numb, refused to obey. Her fingers, already scraped and bleeding, slipped on the smooth, cold surface of the abyss wall, unable to find any purchase. The air, once merely cold, now became a biting gale, whipping her face and tearing the last threads of hope from her mind. Small stones and dust fell around her, like tears from the abyss itself, marking the path to her destiny. Each movement of the rock was a cruel reminder of inevitability, a macabre ticking clock counting the remaining seconds of her life. Panic transformed into a chilling acceptance, a brutal recognition that there was no more fight, only the wait for the end. Up above, on the dark edge, the bull's silhouette remained imposing. Its eyes, which Ilara imagined fixed on her, were like beacons of a silent judgment. It snorted again, a deep, profound sound that wasn't of rage, but of an ancestral authority, as if presiding over the final ritual. The sound reverberated through the gorge, amplifying Ilara's terror and making the ledge tremble one last time. It was as if the animal itself was delivering the sentence, confirming that the scales of justice had finally balanced. In a last, desperate act of self-preservation, Ilara tried to scream, but her voice failed, transforming into a hoarse wheeze, swallowed by the wind and the vastness of the abyss. She closed her eyes, and images of her life, distorted by guilt and fear, flooded her mind. The old woman's face, blind and serene, appeared in her memory, painfully contrasting with her own face, contorted in terror. The red scarf, the symbol of her cruelty, now seemed a shroud, a funereal adornment for her own fall. She saw herself tying it, pushing, watching the old woman's fragile body stumble. That moment of perverse triumph was now her personal hell. The rock beneath her feet gave a final crack, louder and sharper than any before. It was no longer a fissure, but a complete rupture. The ledge detached from the main wall of the abyss with a prolonged groan, like a bone breaking. Ilara felt gravity pull her with relentless force. Her fingers, which until then had clung to the stone with desperate tenacity, finally gave way. The cold of the rock was replaced by the biting cold of the air, and the sensation of support vanished completely. For an instant, the world seemed to stop. The wind's howl became a deafening roar, and the darkness of the abyss opened to swallow her. She was no longer clinging, she was falling. Freefall was a strange sensation, a mix of paralyzing terror and a strange liberation. The ground, which had seemed infinitely distant before, now approached with terrifying speed. She spun, her body uncontrolled, her arms and legs flailing in a macabre dance with the void. The last glimpse she had was of the abyss's edge, where the bull, a dark smudge against the night sky now tinged with deep purple, remained motionless. Its eyes, if they could be seen, would certainly be fixed on her, witnessing the outcome of her journey. There was no triumph in the animal's gaze, only the cold and relentless execution of a destiny long sealed by Alara's own actions. As she fell, the sound of the wind in her ears was the only sound, a final lament, a chorus for her end. Images of her life, of her cruelty, of her greed flashed by, each one a nail in her coffin. The abyss wasn't just a hole in the earth. It was the mirror of her soul, a bottomless void she herself had created, and now she was being swallowed by it. Darkness enveloped her completely, and Alara's last thought was of a red scarf, floating in her mind like a banner of her own damnation. Impact was imminent, the end inevitable. The impact, which Alara expected to be the crushing end, didn't come all at once. Instead, the darkness that swallowed her transformed into a whirlwind of wind and water. She struck the surface of an underground lake with brutal force, her body colliding with the icy water like a projectile. Pain exploded through every fiber of her being, a searing agony that made her scream. But the sound was muffled by the liquid immensity that engulfed her. The air was violently expelled from her lungs, and she sank, disoriented, her body spinning in a whirlpool of darkness and biting cold. The water was a thermal shock, icy as hell itself, and it enveloped her completely. She felt the crushing pressure, the underwater darkness even deeper, more oppressive than the void of the fall. The burning in her lungs was unbearable, and the panic, which had been a silent scream, was now a monster suffocating her. She tried to swim, but her limbs were numb, heavy, and disorientation was total. Which way was the surface? Which way was the bottom? Fragmented images of her life, distorted by the water and terror, flooded her mind. The serene face of the old woman, blind and vulnerable, appeared in her memory. But now it was not the face of a victim, but of a silent accuser. She saw the red scarf, the same scarf she had tied with such coldness, floating in her vision. A shroud, a symbol of her own damnation. She recalled the wicked smile she had worn when pushing the old woman into the corral, the morbid satisfaction of watching her stumble. Every act of cruelty, every harsh word, every look of contempt, now manifested as a weight, pulling her into the depth she herself had dug for her soul. For a moment she thought it was the end, that she would drown there in the icy depths of the abyss, a slow and agonizing death. But instinctively her body fought. A desperate strength which she didn't know she possessed propelled her upwards. She moved her arms and legs, fighting against the darkness and the cold, against death itself. The surface seemed infinitely distant, but she persisted, each movement a battle against exhaustion and despair. Lie! Her head broke the surface of the water with a sucking sound. She gasped, coughing and choking, pulling the icy air into her lungs in large, painful gulps. The pain was excruciating. Every muscle in her body protested, but she was alive. For now, she was in an underground lake, vast and dark, surrounded by rock walls that rose towards an invisible ceiling where daylight didn't reach. The only illumination came from a narrow crack far above, through which she had fallen, and which now seemed a tiny, unattainable point of hope, a distant star in a sky of rock. The air was heavy, damp, and the echo of her own gasping breaths reverberated through the caverns, amplifying the sound of her own terror. The current was strong, pulling her in an unknown direction into the heart of the darkness. She tried to grab onto something, but there was nothing but the icy water and the smooth, damp, slippery cave walls. Her muscles screamed in protest, and the cold began to numb her senses again, a dangerous dullness that threatened to steal her consciousness. She was adrift, at the mercy of the current, in a world of shadows and mystery. The bull, The image of the bull at the edge of the abyss flashed in her mind, its dark eyes fixed on her like an unforgiving judge. It had pushed her into this hell, into this punishment. But it wasn't here. She was alone. Or was she? A strange sound, a metallic, guttural dragging, echoed from the depths of the cavern, coming from somewhere ahead, where the current was carrying her. It wasn't the sound of water, nor the sound of wild animals. It was something different, something that made her hairs stand on end and a shiver run down her spine. The fear, which had lessened slightly with her survival of the impact, returned with full force, a new and unknown terror, deeper than the fear of falling. The abyss wasn't just a hole, it was a labyrinth, a realm of shadows and dangers she could never have imagined, and she was only just beginning to explore its depths. The current accelerated, pulling her with greater force. She tried to resist, but her arms and legs, already exhausted and numb, wouldn't respond. She was dragged into a narrower passage where the cave walls closed in on her, almost touching the water. The metallic sound grew louder, sharper, and now she could distinguish a hiss, a low, almost inaudible growl that seemed to come from within the rock. The darkness was so dense she couldn't see an inch in front of her. The smell of mold and dampness mixed with a foul odor, something putrid and unknown that turned her stomach. She felt the presence of something large and menacing, hidden in the shadows, watching her. The red scarf, once an instrument of her malice, was now just a blur in her memory, a constant reminder of the debt she was paying. She had escaped the fall, but the abyss had more to offer. The true torment was only just beginning. The current, now a relentless whirlpool, dragged her into the heart of the darkness. The cave walls, once distant, now closed in on her, damp and cold, almost brushing her body. The metallic guttural sound, which had been a distant echo, now reverberated with terrifying clarity, coming from somewhere ahead, where the current mercilessly carried her. It was a sound that didn't belong to the natural world, something forged, something alive, but not like the animals she knew. A sibilant hiss, almost a hoarse whisper, mingled with the dragging sound, and Elara felt a shiver run down her spine, colder than the icy water that enveloped her. The foul odor, once merely a hint, was now overwhelming, a putrid miasma of decay, and something more, something mineral and ferrous that burned her nostrils and turned her stomach. It was the smell of death, but also the smell of something ancient, something that had lingered in the depths for ages. The darkness was absolute, a black canvas that swallowed any glimpse of light. Her wide eyes tried in vain to pierce the veil, but there was nothing but the oppressive void. She was blind, just like the old woman she had condemned, and the bitter irony of this situation did not escape her, even in her state of terror. Her arms and legs, already exhausted and numb, were useless against the force of the current. She was a toy, a dry leaf carried by a raging river, without control, without hope. With every meter she advanced, the sensation of a presence became more palpable, more oppressive. It wasn't just a sound or a smell, it was a vibration in the air, an invisible pressure that seemed to stalk her from the shadows. She could feel the eyes of something upon her, even if she couldn't see it. A sensation that chilled the blood in her veins. Suddenly, the current propelled her into a larger chamber. The water calmed somewhat, but the darkness remained impenetrable. The metallic sound and hiss ceased for an instant, replaced by a heavy silence, a silence more terrifying than any noise. Elara floated, disoriented, her body gently bumping against the damp cave walls. She tried to orient herself, but the darkness was a cloak that enveloped her, robbing her of any sense of direction. Then a different sound, a slow, constant drip, echoing in the vastness of the chamber like a macabre clock. And then a faint glow, a flickering point of light that seemed to come from the depths of the chamber. It was a strange, greenish, almost luminescent light that danced on the water's surface, revealing indistinct outlines of stalactites and stalagmites that rose like the sharp teeth of a petrified monster. Driven by a mix of terror and a spark of hope, Elara began to swim towards the light, ignoring the searing pain in her muscles and the cold that numbed her bones. Each stroke was an act of pure will, a desperate fight against exhaustion. The light, however, seemed to recede as she approached, a cruel mirage in the darkness. As she struggled, her fingers brushed something solid and rough beneath the water. She clung on, desperate, and managed to pull her body out of the current. It was a small rocky ledge, slippery and covered in slime, but solid enough to give her temporary support. She dragged herself to the edge, gasping, her body trembling uncontrollably. The greenish light continued to dance in the distance, now revealing more defined shapes. And that's when she saw it. It wasn't a creature, it wasn't an animal, but something far older and more disturbing. The greenish light emanated from a colossal structure embedded in the cave wall, almost fused with the rock. It was a machine, or what remained of one, made of corroded metal and polished stone, with gigantic gears and twisted pipes that stretched into the darkness. It looked like a mechanical heart, pulsing with a dead energy, and the metallic sound she had heard before was the slow, agonizing grinding of its rusted parts. But it wasn't just the machine that terrified her. Attached to the structure, as if they were part of it, were skeletons. Human skeletons, or what appeared to be in various stages of decomposition, some almost complete, others just fragments of white gleaming bones. They were bound or perhaps fused to the mechanisms, their arms and legs extended in grotesque positions, as if in eternal torment. Some appeared to have been devoured, others crushed. And the foul odor, she now understood, came from this macabre collection of mortal remains. Elara recoiled, her heart pounding uncontrollably in her chest. Panic overwhelmed her again, a primal terror that made her want to scream, but her throat was dry, paralyzed by shock. This was no ordinary cave. It was a tomb, a trap, a place of sacrifice and oblivion. And she had fallen directly into its cold embrace. The machine's greenish light pulsed brighter, illuminating the horror around her a little more. She realized that the ledge she was on was part of a larger platform, extending into the chamber, almost reaching the machine. And at the edge of that platform, there was something else, a figure, motionless, dark, watching her. It wasn't a skeleton, it was a silhouette, tall and slender, that seemed to stand perfectly still in the gloom. Its eyes, if it had eyes, were two bright red slits that seemed to pierce the darkness, fixed on her with a chilling intensity. There was no movement, no sound coming from the figure, just that silent, menacing presence that seemed to absorb all the light and sound from the cave. Elara felt a cold that wasn't from the water but from pure fear, coursed through every cell of her body. The bull, the abyss, the fall, all of it seemed a prelude to this moment. This was the true hell, the final destiny that awaited her. The figure took a step, a single step, slow and deliberate, and the sound of something dragging on the stone floor echoed in the chamber, a metallic, heavy sound that made Elara hold her breath. The red scarf, the symbol of her cruelty, was now an insignificant blur in her mind, overshadowed by the terror that consumed her. She had pushed the old woman to her death, and now death had found her. But it wasn't the quick, clean death she expected. It was a slow, agonizing death, in the depths of an abyss that held secrets darker than any nightmare. The figure moved again, and the machine's greenish light revealed a little more of its outline. It was humanoid, but not human. Its limbs were disproportionately long, and its head seemed to have a bizarre, almost alien shape. and in its hands, or what appeared to be hands, there was something that gleamed faintly, something sharp and pointed. Ilara was trapped. The icy water behind her, the pulsating machine and skeletons beside her, and the shadowy figure in front of her. There was nowhere to go, nowhere to run. The abyss hadn't killed her, but it had delivered her to something far worse. The true torment, as she had sensed, was only just beginning. And she was alone, completely alone in the darkness, with death watching her closely. The figure took another step, the metallic, dragging sound echoing in the chamber like the friction of a rusted blade against damp stone. The machine's greenish glow pulsed, casting dancing shadows that further distorted the creature's silhouette, transforming it into a walking nightmare. Ilara couldn't tear her gaze away, paralyzed by terror. Her eyes, once so full of malice and calculation, were now mere mirrors of panic, reflecting the two red slits that watched her from the darkness. With each movement, the creature seemed to unfold, revealing more of its grotesque form. It wasn't made of flesh and bone, or at least not in a way Ilara could recognize. Its skin, if it was skin, appeared to be a metallic carapace, corroded and stained, that merged with the cave rock in some places, as if it had emerged from it. Its disproportionately long limbs, articulated with a low creak, almost inaudible beneath the dragging sound. The bizarre, elongated head had no discernible facial features, only the red slits that burned with a supernatural intensity. And in its hands, or what appeared to be elongated, sharp claws, there was a metallic gleam, a reflection of the greenish light that revealed the presence of something pointed, perhaps a blade, perhaps a sharpened bone. The foul odor, once merely a miasma, now intensified with the creature's proximity, mixing with a metallic and electrical scent, like that of an old, overloaded generator. Ilara felt her stomach churn, but there was nothing to vomit. Her body was exhausted, her mind in shock. She tried to move, tried to scream, but her throat was locked, her muscles rigid. Fear was an overwhelming weight that pinned her to the rocky ledge, a terror deeper than anything she had ever experienced. The bull, the abyss, the fall. All seemed a prelude to this moment, a mere warm-up for the true torment that awaited her. The creature stopped a few feet from the edge of the platform, directly in front of Ilara. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the constant drip of water and the slow, agonizing pulse of the colossal machine. The red slits in the creature's head seemed to narrow, as if it were assessing her, measuring her. Ilara felt like trapped prey, an insect under the lens of an unforgiving observer. Suddenly, the creature raised one of its claws. There was no haste in its movements, only a deliberate slowness that made each second an eternity. The pointed object in its hand reflected the greenish light, revealing itself as a kind of hook made of dark, rusted metal with a sharp tip that seemed forged for tearing. Ilara closed her eyes for an instant, wishing it was all a nightmare, that she would wake up in her bed, far from that hell. But when she opened them, the creature was still there, motionless, the hook pointed at her. A sibilant sound, almost a whisper, escaped the creature. They weren't words, they weren't sounds Ilara could comprehend, but the intent behind them was unmistakable. It was a sound of hunting, of predation, of an ancient being that had patiently waited in its lair. Ilara felt a shiver run down her spine, the cold of the water seeming insignificant compared to the ice that now numbed her soul. She looked back at the dark, turbulent water. It was a choice between quick death by drowning or slow, agonizing death at the hands of that creature. The instinct for survival, however faint, still burned within her. With a monumental effort, Ilara pushed herself backward, falling back into the icy water with a splash. The shock of immersion was brutal, but adrenaline propelled her. She began to swim desperately, not towards the greenish light, but in the opposite direction, into the depths of the darkness from which she had come. The current, once her enemy, now seemed an ally, pulling her away from the platform. But the creature didn't move. Its red slits followed Elara in the darkness, and the sibilant sound intensified, mixing with a faster dragging, as if the creature was moving along the edge of the platform, keeping her in its field of vision. Elara felt her lungs burn, her muscles protest. With each stroke, she expected to feel the sharp hook sink into her flesh, pulling her back to torment. She didn't know where she was going, only away. The darkness was a cloak that enveloped her, but now she embraced it, hoping it would conceal her. The machine's greenish glow began to dim as she moved away, and the creature's figure became an indistinct blur in the gloom. But the metallic dragging sound persisted, a constant reminder that she was still hunted. The current pulled her into a narrow passage again, the damp, cold walls brushing her body. She could feel the scratches on her skin, but the pain was secondary to the terror. The creature's foul, metallic smell still lingered in the air, a trace of its presence. Elara knew she wasn't safe. The creature hadn't attacked her immediately, hadn't pulled her from the water. There was a cruelty in its waiting, a psychological torture that was almost as terrible as the physical. She was dragged into a sharp bend, and the chamber's greenish light disappeared completely. The darkness was total, absolute. Elara was blind again, like the old woman she had condemned. The irony was a bitter poison in her mouth. She had pushed the old woman into blindness and death, and now she herself was blind, on the verge of a death that was infinitely more terrible. The metallic dragging sound, however, didn't disappear. It seemed to come from behind her, closer than she expected. The creature was following her, not through the water, but along the cave walls, or perhaps by some hidden path Elara couldn't see. The sibilant hiss returned, louder, more menacing. Elara felt an icy panic. She wasn't escaping. She was being herded, guided to another destiny, to another part of that subterranean hell. Her arms and legs were numb, but she continued to fight, to struggle against the current, against the fate that awaited her. She felt the water agitate around her, not just from the current, but from something more. A vibration, a movement. Something was approaching, and it wasn't the creature. It was something in the water, something large and heavy that moved in the dark depths, creating waves that pushed and pulled her. Elara felt a cold, slippery touch on her leg. She screamed, a muffled, gurgling sound that was lost in the water. She kicked, desperate, and felt something pull away, but the touch returned, stronger, wrapping around her ankle. It wasn't a hand. It wasn't a claw. It was something smooth and muscular, something that squeezed with immense force. Panic completely overwhelmed her. She was being pulled down, into the depths, into absolute darkness. The creature's metallic dragging still echoed above her, but now there was a new terror, an aquatic terror, dragging her into an abyss within the abyss. The greenish light and the shadowy figure seemed almost a relief compared to what awaited her in the depths. The true torment, she realized, had not just one form, but many, and all of them were ready to claim her. The cold, slippery touch on her leg transformed into a deadly embrace. It wasn't a hand, it wasn't a claw, but something alive, pulsating, that squeezed with immense force, dragging her into the icy depths. The scream that tried to escape her throat was swallowed by the water, transforming into bubbles that rose frantically like the last gasps of her hope. Her lungs burned, desperate for air, but what enveloped her was only the liquid darkness, dense and cold. She kicked, thrashed, her nails scraping what felt like a smooth, viscous surface. There were no eyes to see, but the sensation was of an immense, serpentine body, wrapping around her like a shroud. The aquatic creature seemed in no hurry, only possessing a relentless determination to drag her down, into an abyss within the abyss. The metallic dragging sound of the shadowy figure above, once an absolute terror, now seemed a distant echo, almost a lament, overshadowed by the visceral panic of being devoured alive by the depths. The pressure in her ears increased, a searing pain adding to the despair. She felt her body being spun, the current becoming a whirlpool around her, propelled by the creature holding her. The darkness was so complete, she couldn't distinguish what was water and what was the thing's body. It was a fusion of terror and disorientation, a liquid nightmare where every second was an eternity of suffocation. A fleeting image of the old woman, blind and helpless, pushed into the corral, flashed through her mind. The irony was a poison that burned more than the lack of air. She had condemned the old woman to darkness and danger, and now she herself was blind, at the mercy of predators that inhabited the shadows she had despised. The red scarf, the symbol of her cruelty, now seemed an insignificant rag, a blood stain in a past that haunted her. Suddenly, the force pulling her down lessened slightly, but didn't release her. Ilara was dragged horizontally, still submerged, through a passage that seemed even narrower than the previous ones. The rocky walls brushed her body, tearing her skin, but she barely felt the pain. Her mind was focused on one thing: breathing. The aquatic creature dragged her into a submerged chamber, where the water pressure was suffocating. She felt the rocky bottom beneath her feet, but it was no relief. It was an unstable floor, covered in cold, slippery mud. The thing holding her ankle was still there, squeezing, but now she could feel she was being pulled into a kind of recess, a crevice in the rock. The darkness was absolute, but Ilara could feel the presence of something more. A different smell, not the metallic and foul odor of the creature above, nor the musty smell of the cave. It was a salty, almost marine scent, mixed with something putrid, like decaying flesh. The metallic dragging sound ceased completely. The creature above had stopped, or perhaps it was waiting. Ilara tried to scream again, but only bubbles escaped. She thrashed with all her might, kicking at whatever she could, trying to free herself from the grip that held her. The aquatic creature didn't react with violence, only with an unwavering firmness, as if accustomed to dealing with struggling prey. Then, a faint, bluish glow emerged in the darkness. It wasn't the greenish light of the machine, nor the creature's red slits. It was a cold, bioluminescent light, emanating from something in the depths of the chamber. As the creature pulled her closer, the light revealed a scene of unspeakable horror. The chamber was an underwater graveyard. Skeletons of animals and, to Ilara's terror, of humans, lay scattered across the muddy floor, some trapped in crevices, others floating slowly in the weak current. And the source of the bluish light was an eye. A single immense eye, glowing with a ghostly intensity, watching her from the darkness. The body holding her was part of a gigantic creature, an abyssal sea monster of immense proportions. What she felt as a smooth, muscular touch was a tentacle, one among many, extending from the creature's shapeless mass. The bluish eye was just one of its sensory organs, and Ilara realized with icy dread that she wasn't being dragged to a hiding place, but into the monster's mouth. The putrid smell intensified, and she saw, or felt, the opening of an immense maw in the creature's dark mass. Teeth, or what appeared to be teeth, sharp as razors, gleamed faintly in the blue light. The monster was in no hurry, merely guiding her to her final destination, to be devoured slowly, piece by piece. Ilara felt the grip on her ankle loosen slightly, but only so that another tentacle, thicker and stronger, wrapped around her waist. She was being lifted, suspended in the water, directly in front of the blue eye that watched her without emotion. Panic completely overwhelmed her, a terror so pure and overwhelming that it made her forget the need to breathe. She saw the skeletons around her, the remains of other victims, and knew her fate would be the same. The abyss hadn't killed her, but had delivered her to something far worse, a primordial predator that inhabited the depths, patiently waiting for its prey. Suddenly, the aquatic creature made an abrupt movement. It wasn't an attack, but a retraction. The tentacle holding her waist contracted, and Ilara was pulled back, away from the immense maw. The blue eyes shifted, no longer focused on her, but on something above, in the darkness. A sound. A sound Ilara couldn't hear, but could feel the vibration in the water. A sibilant hiss, amplified by the water that seemed to come from above, from the passage through which she had been dragged. The metallic creature. It hadn't given up. The aquatic creature seemed to hesitate, its tentacles moving with unusual agitation. It was as if two predators were in a standoff, one defending its territory, the other invading. Ilara was caught in the middle, a prize contested by two equally terrifying forms of death. The tentacle holding her waist tightened again, but this time it didn't pull her towards the maw. Instead, she was flung sideways against a rocky wall. The impact left her dizzy, but the tentacle still held her, keeping her trapped as if she were a shield or perhaps bait. The blue light from the aquatic monster's eye pulsed faster, and Ilara could feel the water agitate with greater intensity. The metallic creature's sibilant hiss grew louder, and she could feel the vibration of something moving rapidly above her, perhaps descending into the chamber. She was trapped between two horrors, one aquatic and one terrestrial, both thirsty for her life. The irony of her situation was cruel. She had escaped the bull, the abyss, the fall, only to find herself in a hell of predators, where every corner of the darkness held a new form of torment. Her lungs burned, her vision was blurry, but the instinct for survival, however faint, still propelled her. She had to escape. She had to find a way to free herself before she was torn to pieces by one or devoured whole by the other. The true torment, she realized, was the vain hope, the promise of a death that never came, only transformed into something worse. And the red scarf, the symbol of her malice, was now just a specter in her mind, a reminder that all of this was the price to pay. Suddenly, the water around Ilara exploded in a violent whirlpool. It wasn't the aquatic creature, nor the metallic one. It was a new force, a shock that slammed her against the cave wall with crushing brutality. The tentacle that held her released its grip, and she felt her body being dragged away into a new passage, while the sounds of a titanic confrontation echoed in the submerged chamber, a clash of predators that had freed her, but only to throw her into a new and unknown danger. The water exploded around Ilara, not with the force of a tentacle or the fury of a claw, but with the blind brutality of a shockwave. The impact slammed her against the rocky wall with a violence that ripped the air from her lungs, even submerged. The tentacle that held her released its grip, and she felt her body being dragged, not towards the monster's mouth, but into a new passage, a dark fissure that opened in the side of the chamber. The sound of the titanic confrontation between the two predators echoed in the water, transformed into dull vibrations that shook her, a chorus of destruction that was her only chance of escape. She was propelled forward, spinning uncontrollably, her body whipped by the current created by the battle. The searing pain in her head and ribs was a cruel reminder that she was still alive, still fighting. Her lungs burned, oxygen a distant memory, a luxury she could no longer afford. The darkness was absolute, but fear was a beacon that guided her, a primal terror that drove her to thrash, to kick, to try to swim amidst the chaos. The passage was narrow, the rocky walls scraping her skin, tearing pieces from her clothes. She felt the biting cold of the water, the crushing pressure, and the desperate lack of air. The whirlpool pulled her up, down, sideways, without direction, without control. She was a mere object, a leaf carried by an underwater storm, but then a different sensation. The current began to lessen, and she felt a slight upward incline. A faint, almost cruel hope ignited in her chest. Air. She needed air. With her last strength, Elara kicked upwards, propelling herself with her arms, tearing through the water with fierce determination. Light. She needed light, air, anything but that liquid, suffocating darkness. Her ears buzzed, the pain in her head intensified, but she continued. And then, a miracle. A bubble of air. Small, but real. She followed it, desperate, and felt the water become less dense, the pressure diminish. With one last, agonizing effort, her head broke the surface. Air. The cold, damp air filled her lungs in a hoarse, painful, but glorious gasp. She coughed, choked, expelling the salty, putrid water that had invaded her throat. Her eyes, still blurry from darkness and pain, tried to adjust. She was in a chamber, but it wasn't the same one as before. This one was smaller, more claustrophobic, and the ceiling was low, dripping cold water. Darkness still predominated, but there was a faint, almost imperceptible light coming from somewhere above, a crack in the rock that allowed a pale, distant glow to enter. The air was heavy, laden with the smell of mold, damp rock, and, to her horror, a metallic, foul odor, the same as the creature from above. The sound of the battle in the submerged chamber could still be heard, a muffled roar that made the cave walls vibrate. But it was more distant now, an echo of her nightmare. Elara clung to a rocky ledge, trembling, her entire body aching. Every muscle protested, every bone felt dislocated. She was injured, exhausted, but alive. For now. She tried to stand, but her legs gave way. The ankle that had been squeezed by the tentacle was throbbing, and she could feel blood trickling from scratches and cuts on her arms and legs. The faint light revealed an uneven floor, covered with loose stones and puddles of water. She was in a kind of dry cave, or at least partially dry. But the metallic smell, it was stronger here, and then she heard it, a dragging sound, not the distant sound of the creature in the water, but a closer, sharper sound. The metallic dragging, the creature from above, it hadn't given up. Panic returned, icy and relentless. She had escaped the aquatic monster only to be thrown back into the clutches of the other. The sound approached, a sibilant hiss that seemed to tear through the cave's silence. Elara crawled, desperate, trying to hide behind a cluster of rocks. Her heart pounded uncontrollably, a drum of terror in her ears. The faint light from the crack in the ceiling revealed something more. Marks, deep scratch marks on the cave walls, as if something heavy and metallic had been dragged through there countless times. And there was a glow. A faint, reddish glow that pulsed rhythmically, coming from deeper in the cave, from an even darker opening. The metallic dragging stopped. An oppressive silence fell over the chamber, broken only by Elara's ragged breathing and the dripping water. She held her breath, her body tense, her eyes wide in the darkness. Where was it? What was it waiting for? Suddenly, an immense shadow projected onto the cave wall, blocking the little light that entered. The metallic creature. It was at the entrance of the passage from which Elara had emerged, its silhouette distorted and terrifying. Its eyes, or what appeared to be eyes, glowed with the same red light Elara had seen before, but now they were fixed on her. The creature made no sound, merely observed her like a predator cornering its prey. Elara felt a chill run down her spine. There was no escape. She was trapped between the metallic creature and the abyss from which she had just emerged, where the other two monsters were still fighting. The irony was a punch to the gut. She had escaped certain death, only to find herself in another, perhaps even crueler one. The red scarf, the symbol of her cruelty, now seemed an invisible shroud, enveloping her, suffocating her. The blind old woman, the bull, the abyss. Everything seemed a prelude to this moment, the final reckoning. The metallic creature began to move, slowly, methodically, its segmented body dragging across the rocky floor with a sibilant hiss. It was coming for Elara, and this time there was nowhere to run. The immense shadow of the metallic creature projected onto the cave wall, a distorted spectre of terror that blocked the meager light. Its eyes, or what Ilara perceived as eyes, glowed with a pulsating red, fixed on her like a predator finally cornering its prey. There was no sound, only the icy observation, the silent promise of an inevitable end. Ilara felt a chill run down her spine, colder than the water that still streamed from her body. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Trapped between the metallic creature and the abyss from which she had just emerged, where the aquatic monster still fought, her situation was an endless nightmare. The irony was a punch to the gut. She had escaped certain death, only to find herself in another, perhaps even crueler one. The red scarf, the symbol of her malice, now seemed an invisible shroud, enveloping her, suffocating her. The blind old woman, the bull, the abyss, everything seemed a prelude to this moment, the final reckoning. The price, she realized with painful clarity, was being paid in installments of torment, each more excruciating than the last. The metallic creature began to move, not with the speed of an attack, but with methodical slowness, its segmented body dragging across the rocky floor with a sibilant hiss that seemed to tear through the cave's silence. Each movement was a reminder of its inevitability, a macabre ticking clock marking Ilara's final seconds. She could feel the vibration in the ground, the tremor that ran through the loose stones, approaching, relentless, panic, once a silent scream in her mind, now transformed into an icy paralysis. Her legs, already weak and aching, refused to obey. Her ankle throbbed, a constant pain added to the burning in her lungs, the throbbing headache, the scratches and cuts that covered her body. She was an empty shell, on the verge of collapse, and the metallic monster was coming to claim what remained. But then, amidst the despair, her blurry eyes focused on the reddish glow that pulsed rhythmically, coming from deeper in the cave, from an even darker opening. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. A light, a possibility. Whatever was there, it couldn't be worse than the slow, agonizing death that awaited her in the metallic creature's claws. With a last shred of survival instinct, Ilara gathered her strength. There was no time to think, only to act. The metallic monster was a few feet away, its shadow already engulfing the space where she was crouched. The sibilant hiss intensified, and she could feel the metallic heat radiating from the creature's body. She propelled herself forward, not standing, but crawling with desperate urgency, dragging herself over the jagged stones. Ignoring the searing pain that tore at her palms and knees, every inch was an agony, but the sight of that red glow was a beacon in the darkness, a faint promise of something other than immediate death. The metallic creature reacted. Its movement, once slow and methodical, accelerated. The sibilant hiss transformed into a sharper, more aggressive sound, like metal scraping metal at high speed. Ilara heard the heavy dragging behind her, the vibration in the ground intensifying, indicating that the monster was approaching rapidly. She didn't look back. She couldn't. Her eyes were fixed on the dark opening, on the red glow that seemed to call to her. She forced her exhausted body through the narrow passage, the rocky walls scraping her skin, tearing what remained of her clothes. The air changed. It became hotter, denser, laden with a sulphurous metallic and something else, an organic and putrid smell that turned her stomach. The red glow intensified with each crawl, painting the cave walls with shades of blood and fire. The passage opened into a larger but no less claustrophobic chamber. The heat was suffocating, and the air was almost unbreathable. And then Ilara saw the source of the glow. It wasn't a crack in the rock, nor an incandescent mineral. It was a pool of viscous, vivid red liquid, pulsing with its own light, like a heart beating in the center of the earth. The surface bubbled slowly, releasing dense vapors that danced in the reddish light. Around the pool, the floor was covered by a dark, sticky substance, and there were shapes. Strange, twisted shapes that seemed to be the remains of something organic, but with a metallic sheen. Bones. They were bones, but not of common animals. They were large, with a structure that seemed to defy known biology. They were skeletons of creatures Ilara had never seen, mixed with metallic fragments that seemed to have fused with the rock. The foul odor was overwhelming here, a mix of decomposition, metal, and something chemical. Ilara coughed, choked, the hot, toxic air burning her lungs. She was in a nest, or perhaps a graveyard, of something terrible. The metallic dragging sound echoed in the passage behind her, louder, closer. The metallic creature had entered the chamber. Its red eyes gleamed at the entrance, and the sibilant hiss seemed to vibrate in the very rock. She was cornered again, but this time the threat didn't come from just one predator. The pool of red liquid pulsed, and Ilara could feel a strange heat emanating from it, an energy that seemed alive, dangerous. Suddenly, a movement in the pool. A larger bubble rose to the surface, bursting with a wet sound, and then something moved at the bottom of the red liquid. Something large, something that seemed to be dormant, but was now beginning to awaken, stirred by Ilara's presence and the approaching metallic creature. The pool's red glow intensified, and Ilara felt a primal terror, a fear that surpassed everything she had experienced until then. She had fallen from one abyss to another, from one hell to a deeper one, where the earth itself seemed to breathe with a monstrous life. Ilara's terror was no longer a scream, but a deafening silence that echoed in her mind. She had traded one abyss for another, certain death for an even more terrifying uncertainty. The hot, toxic air burned her nostrils. The sulphurous, metallic, and putrid smell suffocated her. Her eyes, wide in the reddish gloom, alternated between the immense silhouette of the metallic creature at the chamber's entrance and the pulsating pool of scarlet liquid before her. The metallic monster, its red eyes fixed on her, began to move again. It wasn't a rush, but a slow, inexorable drag, each segment of its body creaking and hissing, a sound that seemed to tear the fabric of reality. The vibration in the ground was palpable, a tremor that ran through the loose stones, approaching, relentless. Ilara knew there was nowhere to go. The passage from which she had come was being sealed by the creature's presence, and before her was the unknown, whatever was awakening in the pool of blood and light. The pool, once merely a sinister glow, now bubbled with greater intensity. Larger bubbles rose to the surface, bursting with a wet, viscous sound, releasing vapors that danced in the reddish light, distorting the shadows of the strange forms around. They were bones, she was sure now, gigantic, twisted bones with a metallic sheen that seemed fused to the very bone structure. They were the remains of creatures that defied comprehension, victims of something that inhabited this place. And now, something new was stirring below. A more pronounced movement agitated the liquid's surface. It wasn't a bubble, but a ripple, as if something large was writhing in the crimson depths. Ilara recoiled instinctively, her back hitting the rocky wall. The searing pain in her ankle and the scratches on her body forgotten before the primal terror that overwhelmed her. The red scarf, she thought, the scarf she had tied on the blind old woman. It was a shroud, yes, but not for the old woman. It was for her. Every torment, every step in this hell was the payment, the retribution for her cruelty. The metallic creature was only a few feet away. Its sibilant hiss was now a sharp whistle, almost a metallic growl, and Ilara could feel the heat radiating from its segmented body. The shadow it cast on the wall swallowed the space, transforming the chamber into a dark, claustrophobic prison. She could feel the creature's cold, metallic breath, even before seeing it completely, but then the pool of red liquid agitated violently. A dark, massive form began to slowly emerge from the viscous depths. It wasn't an aquatic creature like those of the abyss, nor metallic like the one cornering her. It was something different, something that seemed to defy the laws of nature. Its skin, if it could be called that, was a dark red, almost brown, covered in sticky bioluminescent substances that pulsed in sync with the pool's liquid. The first thing Ilara distinguished were the tentacles. They weren't the thin, agile tentacles of the aquatic monster, but thick, muscular appendages that writhed and extended from the pool, dripping the red liquid onto the dark, sticky floor. Each tentacle was adorned with suckers that seemed to have sharp teeth, and some of them had metallic protrusions embedded, as if they had absorbed and incorporated fragments of metal into their own body. A guttural sound, a wet, deep gurgle, echoed through the chamber, coming from the emerging creature. It was a sound of hunger, of awakening, of an ancient and monstrous existence. The pool's red glow intensified, and the pulsating light revealed more horrifying details. The creature's head, if it had one, was a shapeless mass of flesh and metal with multiple eyes that glowed with a greenish-yellow light, contrasting with the pool's red. They fixed on Ilara, a cruel, ancient intelligence behind the gaze. The metallic creature stopped. Its sibilant hiss diminished, and its red eyes, once fixed on Ilara, now turned towards the monster emerging from the pool. There was a hesitation, a pause, as if even that relentless predator was assessing the new threat, or perhaps recognizing a superior power. Ilara was trapped between two hells. Before her, the primordial horror rising from the pool, its sticky, toothed tentacles extending, its greenish-yellow gaze fixed on her. Behind her, the metallic monster, silent for a moment but still an imminent threat, blocking any escape. The heat in the chamber was unbearable, the smell nauseating, and the sound of the pool creature's gurgle filled the air, promising an end Ilara couldn't even conceive. She closed her eyes for an instant, her face contorted in a mask of despair. The blind old woman, the bull, the abyss. Everything had been a prelude to this moment, the final reckoning. There was nowhere left to run, nowhere to hide. She was the prey, and the predators of different natures were ready to exact the price of her malice. The red scarf now was the knot in her throat, tightening, suffocating her as the pool creature raised a tentacle, dripping crimson liquid, and the metallic monster took a step forward, resuming its advance. The end was here. But the end didn't come as she expected. Not immediately. The pool creature's tentacle, thick and pulsating, didn't extend towards Ilara. Instead, with surprising speed for its size, it whipped sideways, striking the metallic creature with tremendous force. The impact resonated through the chamber, a sound of twisted metal and wet flesh. The segmented body of the metallic monster was flung against the rocky wall, causing stones and debris to fall. A sharp, distorted hiss escaped its jaws, a mixture of pain and fury. Its red eyes, once focused on Ilara, now gleamed with hatred towards the new aggressor. The pool creature let out another deep gurgle, a sound that seemed to vibrate in Ilara's bones. More tentacles emerged from the crimson liquid, slapping the sticky floor, raising sulphurous vapors. There was no doubt this was its domain, and the metallic monster was an intruder. The air in the chamber became electrified with the tension of two alpha predators confronting each other. Ilara, pressed against the wall, opened her eyes, shocked by the turn of events. It was a chance, a minuscule and desperate chance. The metallic monster, though wounded, was already recovering, its segments realigning with a sinister creak. It propelled itself forward, not towards Ilara, but towards the tentacle that had struck it, its sharp claws trying to tear the red, sticky flesh. The chamber transformed into a stage of primordial battle. Thick, toothed tentacles whipped through the air, striking the metallic body with deafening blows. The metallic monster, in turn, tried to bite and tear, its red eyes flashing with blind fury. Fragments of metal flew, mixing with the red liquid that streamed from the wounded tentacles. The smell of burnt metal and putrid flesh intensified, suffocating Elara. She knew she didn't have much time. The fight was fierce, but she was an easy target, a fly between two titans. Her eyes scanned the chamber, searching for any crack, any hole, anything that could offer an escape route. The pool's red glow, now agitated by the battle, danced on the walls, revealing a small, almost imperceptible opening in the rock, hidden behind a pile of twisted bones near the floor. It was too small, too tight, but it was the only option. With a new surge of adrenaline, Elara propelled herself forward, ignoring the searing pain in her ankle. She crawled over the bones, feeling the cold, metallic texture beneath her hands, the foul odor even stronger there. Every movement was an agony, but the sight of that hole was her only hope. The sounds of battle echoed behind her, the clash of metal against flesh, the furious gurgle of the pool creature, the sibilant hiss of the metallic monster. She squeezed through the opening, the rough rock scraping her skin, tearing what remained of her clothes. The space was claustrophobic, barely allowing her to pass. The air became thinner, colder, and the chamber's red glow rapidly diminished, replaced by an almost total darkness. She could hear the echoes of the battle fading, becoming a distant hum, a reminder of the hell she had just escaped. Crawling in the dark, Elara felt the ground slope downwards. The passage narrowed further, and she had to crawl on her stomach, using her elbows and knees. The smell of metal and putrefaction was replaced by an aroma of damp earth and mold, a welcome relief, but one that didn't lessen her fear. She didn't know where she was going, only that she was moving away from that place of horror. Suddenly, the passage opened. Elara rolled out, falling onto a soft dirt floor. The air was fresh, damp, and above her a sliver of pale light filtered through an opening in the rock. It was daylight, or at least the light of the outside world. She had found an exit, but freedom didn't come without a price. Her body was broken, her mind traumatized, and as she breathed the fresh air, a new sensation invaded her. It wasn't the smell of metal or putrefaction, but a familiar, almost forgotten aroma. The smell of wet earth, of grass, and of animal. A low, guttural sound echoed in the darkness before her, a sound she recognized with a chill down her spine. It was a bellow that seemed to come from a very close place. That sound, she knew, belonged to a bull. And the abyss, she realized with icy dread, was not yet done with her. The fresh air rushed into Elara's lungs, an icy gust that for an instant seemed to wash away the putridity and burnt metal from her nostrils. She rolled out of the tight passage, falling onto a soft, damp dirt floor. The pale light filtering from above was a balm to her eyes, accustomed to the infernal darkness of the chamber. She had escaped, she had survived, but the sense of relief was short-lived, brutally interrupted by the imposing reality. The smell. It wasn't just earth and mold. It was grass, dew, and an unmistakable, heavy, earthy aroma that she knew all too well. The smell of animal, and then the sound. A low, guttural bellow vibrating in the air, so close it made her bones tremble. A bellow that was not of welcome, but of an imposing, unshakable presence. With an agonizing effort, Elara raised her head, her eyes scanning her surroundings. The light was faint, twilight settling in, but it was enough for the scene to reveal itself in all its familiar horror. She was back in the corral, back at the edge of the abyss, the same corral where it had all begun, where her cruelty had been sown. The wooden fences, twisted and weathered by time, rose around her, forming a rustic prison. Beyond them, the void, the abyss, a gaping maw in the earth, swallowing the fading daylight. And there, in the center of that stage of her own disgrace, was he, the bull. Its massive body, dark as night, seemed even larger and more menacing under the dying light. Its horns, Once just a distant threat, now looked like sharp blades ready for the kill. It stood there imposing as if waiting for her. And its eyes, Ilara could feel the weight of its gaze, even before seeing them clearly. But it wasn't just the bull. Beside the animal, sitting calmly on a small wooden bench she herself had scorned, was the old woman. The blind mother-in-law. Intact, could it be? After everything. The red scarf, the same scarf Ilara had tied over her eyes, was now loose, hanging loosely around her neck, a vibrant contrast against the grey of her hair. The old woman seemed at peace, her wrinkled face turned towards the sky, as if listening to the whispers of the wind or perhaps the echoes of an approaching justice. A chill ran down Ilara's spine, colder than any draught from the abyss. She had fled from monsters of metal and flesh, from viscous depths and darkness, only to emerge at the exact point where her fall had originated. It was a circle, a cycle of torment closing in on her. The red scarf. It wasn't the old woman's shroud, it was her own. The bull moved its head slowly, its dark, deep eyes fixing on Ilara. There was no blind fury like the first time, but a kind of recognition, a cold and relentless intelligence. It took a step, then another, its heavy hoof thudding on the ground with a sound that echoed in Ilara's chest. It wasn't a charge. It wasn't an impulsive attack. It was a march of judgment. Ilara tried to stand, but her injured ankle gave way under her weight, and she fell back onto the damp earth. A cry of pain and despair escaped her lips, but the sound was muffled by the bull's low, continuous bellow, which was now approaching. She crawled backward desperately, her hands scraping the earth, her eyes fixed on the animal that had become her executioner. The old woman, oblivious to the drama unfolding a few feet from her, remained seated, a serene figure amidst the imminent chaos. The bull stopped a few paces from Ilara, its hot, heavy breath hitting her face. The smell of grass and earth, now mixed with the animal's strong odor, filled her senses. She could see the rough texture of its hide, the contained strength in its muscles. There was nowhere to go, the fence behind her, the abyss to her right, the bull in front of her. She was a fly caught in a web, and the predator had come to claim its prey. The animal lowered its head, not in an attack, but in a slow, deliberate gesture, as if assessing her, measuring the extent of her misery. Its horns, once menacing, now seemed to point to the void behind her. Ilara felt the ground tremble beneath her, not from the bull, but from her own body convulsing with fear. Images of the cave monsters, of the twisted bones, of the red liquid, all mingled with the current scene. She had escaped one hell only to fall into another, a hell she herself had created. With one last, desperate effort, Ilara tried to push herself sideways, away from the bull, away from the abyss, but her body betrayed her. Her ankle snapped, the searing pain making her vision darken. She staggered, lost her balance. There was no push, no goring, only gravity, the inevitable consequence of her own weakness and the panic that consumed her. Her feet slipped on the loose earth at the edge of the precipice. For an instant, she hung suspended in the air, her eyes wide, a scream caught in her throat. She saw the bull, its eyes fixed on her, a silent witness. She saw the old woman, still serene, the red scarf swaying gently in the wind. And then the void, the abyss, which she thought she had cheated, finally claimed her. There was no sound, only darkness swallowing her, a deep and eternal silence that followed her last breath. The red scarf now was the shroud, not for the old woman but for Ilara. The cruel daughter-in-law had met her end, not by the hands of a monster, but by the relentless justice she herself had invoked. The bull remained motionless, observing the void, while the blind old woman continued to feel the wind on her face, oblivious to the final act of the drama that had unfolded. Silence once again reigned in the corral, which now held only the memory of malice and the peace of innocence.